Happy New Year and welcome to Elmhurst Now. I'm Ken Bartels, your host, and tonight we're going to be talking about downtown Elmhurst, both its past and its present, and probably a little bit about its future too. And to do that, I have two outstanding guests. I have current Mayor Steve Morley and former Mayor Tom Marcucci. And gentlemen, welcome back to Elmhurst Now. You've both been here before. So
thanks for the invitation, Ken.
Thanks for having me.
Downtown Elmhurst. You're both locals, classically locals. So I'm going to ask you both, starting out, what's your earliest memory that you can come up with being in downtown Elmhurst? Where were you? What was it? Steve?
Earliest memory would probably be at Honey Girl with my mother, and it always confused me because it had two entrances, and I never knew where we were going. But I knew I had to stick close to her because she might go out of one door or the other. So that'd be my earliest memory of downtown Elmhurst.
Tom?
Well, I'm a little older than you, so I go back a little deeper. When I went to grade school, I went to Immaculate Conception, which was, as you know, on the corner of Arthur and York on the south end of downtown. Well, about a block north of there was a little, what I'll call affectionately, a ma and pa grocery store called Heinemann's. And there was a family in there that ran this typical small grocery store, a little bread, a little shelf-stable items, pop in a cooler, and a big penny candy bin. So me and my grade school buddies, starting when I was old enough to do so alone, maybe 5th grade, would go there every day after school with a nickel or a dime and buy a batch of penny candy before I started my walk home, which was on Atwater Street back in Bryn Haven. So it was about a half-hour walk for a 5th grader, which we used to do a lot in those days.
The downtown, you know, Elmhurst as the gateway to DuPage County and the first community you encounter when you leave Cook County, and deep roots, as two of you know much better than I do. But the downtown always was the center of things. Now it's called City Center, but why did Western suburban downtowns thrive, or why were they so important perhaps 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago even, as opposed to where they may be today? But we'll touch on that in a minute.
Mm-hmm. I think back then, before you had a lot of the chain stores, and certainly before the internet, it really gave individual identities. So you may have had Downers Grove or Glen Ellen or Elmhurst, but you know, there weren't many downtowns that had a York Theater and a Fannie Mae and a Soukups and an Elmhurst Chop Suey. So I think it was something that not only did the residents identify with, but if and when they went around the western suburbs, they could identify the differences. And it really created a personality for the downtown and for the city.
Mm-hmm. I concur. The older the downtown, the older the community, the bigger the downtown, the more time it had to grow, because if you go back to, and I'll just pick a date, a random date, 1900, we served a much larger area than just Elmhurst. It's kind of like, if you put it in the context, York Community High School in those days, in 1917 when it was founded, served a much larger geographic area than it does today. So our spread, our geographic spread, was more significant. And being that way, it was able to bring more dollars into the area, which supported larger retailers who got more established. If you think about it, there was Elmhurst, and as you said, the other significant communities, will just use Glen Ellen and Wheaton as examples, Lombard. But then, particularly to our east, the downtowns there tended to be smaller, and that really didn't have the gravitas to pull in folks from a larger area.
Well, and Elmhurst for a long time was a key financial center too. I know the first banks in Elmhurst National and what have you. As long as we've talked about a couple of other communities, the definition of several communities downtowns has gone away. I mean, there are towns that not very far from Elmhurst that if we went in them today, we could probably identify where the downtown was, but it's probably not there anymore. The reason for that, or the reasons for that?
Well, I think it gets back to that size. I think that our size, our weight, if you will, gave us a little bit of a more defense against the onslaught of what you mentioned, the internet, the chains that have really changed business. Think of what it's done to the restaurant business, by way of example, and the shopping centers. Let's not leave out the shopping centers. So when thinking about our discussion this evening, I was thinking about when was the height, or rather the depth of downtown Elmhurst. When was it? And you know, it never really got that bad. And part of the reason was that our downtown core retailers were really paying attention. You know, at one time when you were a child, when I was a child in Elmhurst, we had 3 men's stores, haberdashers, right on York Road, almost within the same block. Mixed in with them were numerous women's shops, and then there were 3 or 4 department stores, full department stores. And just off the top of my head, there was Old Swangs, there was the Elm, and there was Ruby's. And I might be leaving somebody out. So there was some real weight there, and that meant that our exposure was great. We really had something to lose. So it wasn't like, oh, you know, we're going to sit around and hope it works out. There was an activism in town to try to push off as far as possible the negative effects of, particularly I'm thinking of at this moment, Oak Brook Shopping Center.
Well, we'll stay with that for a second. But Steve, do you have the reasons why downtowns disappeared?
Well, I think one thing that I've learned just in the short amount of time I've been an elected official, it's been about 8 or 9 years, is that you really can't ever take your foot off the gas when it comes to planning and looking ahead. If you just take your foot off the gas for 2 years, the amount of opportunities that pass you by, you can't even calculate. So you kind of always have to have your hook in the water. It's one of the things that my wife commented on after I was an elected official for maybe 3, 4, 5 years. And I'm always coming home with different stories and what we're doing in the city. And she said, you know, I had no idea how much hard work it was to keep a downtown running. And it really takes a dedication. You certainly have to start with a great canvas, you know, the city of Elmhurst and its residents, who I think have a pride of Elmhurst. But then you have to have dedicated, as Tom said, businesses that are always on the lookout for what's next, business owners who care, and then you have to have a city that supports it. And it's just a lot of hard work. And if you misstep, or, you know, Elmhurst has been very fortunate to have the financial resources when needed to support businesses, whether it's through streetscaping or new streets or, you know, new trucks. It just showcases very well. So it's a little bit of all of that, in my opinion, has allowed Elmhurst, and things always change, but has allowed Elmhurst, as the market evolves, as the internet, you know, happens. You know, I'm sure, you know, Oak Brook Mall, when it first happened, I know that we actually had an opportunity to annex Oak Brook Mall in the 1950s, and I'm glad we didn't make that decision, right? But it's just adapting and hard work. And I've seen it in the 8.5 years I've been an elected official. And clearly it's happened long before then, because when somebody goes out of business, you know, we try to encourage free market, but you know, someone's always there to step in and try something new.
Well, we'll backtrack a little bit, I guess, and talk about, Tom, you take office in 1993 as mayor, and there's a rather famous story that you frankly told many times about the clipping that you carried around inside your coat. Mm-hmm. And I wish you would share that story now, but the primary reason for sharing the story with our audience is the downtown was struggling at that point in time. It may not have been the low point, or I don't even know when the low point was, but it clearly was in some stress at that point. Mm-hmm.
Well, that article, which I have talked a lot about, it kind of became my thing, was in September of, I believe it was 94, the Chicago Tribune, a writer there named Lori Goering, wrote a 3-day article, about 2 pages per day, about the grain of the suburbs. And on the third day, she posed the question, are the suburbs going to wither and die? And she supported this, and it was her opinion that they were, and she had all kinds of statistics that she pulled out of data banks about grain, meaning aging populations, lack of investment, businesses closing up, et cetera. And the news was that this was now reaching into the suburbs, and the next target was Elmhurst. Well, what she didn't know was that Elmhurst had already taken, I think, significant steps to stop and to turn around the fortunes of downtown Elmhurst and thereby all of Elmhurst. I think if downtown Elmhurst is closed up, boarded up, soaped up windows, and 9 resale shops, a resale shop and an antique store is a nice part of the mix. But you can go into some communities and see, 4 antique stores and 4 resale shops. That's not good. That's not healthy, because you're not going to invest dollars in a home, and not only invest dollars, but your life and your years and where you're going to raise your children in a community where the downtown looks like that. So in the 8, 10, 12 years before I became mayor, the downtown business group led Abner Gannett, was a downtown businessman and the mayor of Elmhurst. Mayor Quinn and later Mayor Garrigus were really addressing these issues. One of the first things I did as mayor within the first couple of months was go over to a groundbreaking for what they called at the time the super block, which had been assembled. It's, for folks today, it's the block where the Walgreens is on, and the Chipotle, thank you, the Egg Harbor. That block was an assemblage of businesses that were not doing so well, some vacancies, and there was an opportunity to step in, and the TIF had been put in place a number of years before, and that allowed them the financial resources to collect that property and reassemble it and sell it to a developer who invested then private funds in there. So that's why they call it a public-private partnership to get that block going. And that was a very, very important step, and that was done before, that was well in progress before I became mayor.
So the TIF, first of all, we need to back up. We did a whole show on TIF a few years back, but what's a TIF?
The TIF is a financial tool that the state allows, tax increment financing. Basically what it does, it allows for, it's a tool to allow the municipality to provide incentives for developers who come into town. And you're borrowing with future dollars. So a developer comes into town, maybe you have a parking lot that you know used to be a gas station, so it's contaminated, needs remediation, and the person who owns it can't sell it. It's a great piece of property, but there's $400,000 in remediation that needs to happen, and there's some utilities that need to be added. So there's enough of a financial barrier where it's keeping the developers out. But with maybe a little push, a little help, you can entice a developer to come into town, sharing some of those costs, or maybe you pay for the remediation or pay for move some of the utilities, and then ultimately, that's really a loan that the city takes out on future taxes. So it's really taking some future tax dollars, investing them now to get developers an interest in property that maybe is lagging.
So the first TIF in Elmhurst, which we collectively determined started in 1986.
Correct.
TIF 1, which essentially is the downtown.
Yes.
That was already starting to do its job.
Yeah, that was in place and already starting to do its job. I always felt kind of sorry for the 2 previous mayors who put that in place, and then I came along, and in about year 3 or 4 we started the streetscaping, and all of a sudden folks were telling me, "Oh, you saved downtown." I did? No, this is just another step in the plan that they had written that we were executing, which involves streetscapes. That's the pretty sidewalks and the nice street lights and things like that. You need to make it attractive so that people feel comfortable going there, they feel safe going there, they know it's an up-and-coming place, not a has-been kind of a place. People want to go where success is because they want to join in on it.
Was the arrangement between the city and Willis Johnson and the York Theater, was that pre-TIF? Was that part of the TIF? Do you recall?
I don't recall because it was before my time. I don't know. If I had to guess, I would say that was not a TIF function. So it was a straight-out loan, which is different because in a TIF, you anticipate paying back the money that you spend.
Right. It wasn't part of
by the incrementally larger taxes on the property, which are now worth more. That's why it's called a tax increment financing district. In the case of York Theater, the city invested or loaned money to Willis Johnson at the York Theater on the promise that he would pay it back, and in fact he did. It's the best loan one of the best maneuvers the city ever made. And of course, I oftentimes refer to Willis Johnson as the man who almost personally revitalized downtown Elmhurst. The York Theater today has 9 screens. Those 9 screens, each movie has a gathering and then a dispersal of a group of people. A movie's last an hour and 20 minutes. You do the math, there's one of those, either gatherings or dispersals going on, something like every 6 or 7 minutes. So if you're the ice cream shop or the coffee shop next door or even the dress shop next door, that's a lot of opportunity, a lot of synergism for you to tap into to help make your business go.
Well, in doing some research for tonight, I can't tell you how many people that I talked to that mentioned that loan, right, that action on behalf of the city council took, controversial at the time.
Yes.
And now it's looking back like, well, what was the issue? So the TIF's in place. The super block is moving forward, and the super block, I believe, included the old Rubies, which is now BW3s and several other, a couple of other things, Chase. What else was going on at that point in time that made the TIF effective?
Well, one of the things we were able to do is build parking decks. Now, even today, parking decks are controversial.
I think there's one about to go online.
There's one about to go online. But any real estate developer, and as the mayor, I always kind of considered myself the real estate developer. It was my job to move the tax base along to the benefit of all the citizens, to lower the taxes on their homes because we could collect the taxes in the downtowns. In a very important way, that's what downtowns are for today. So in any case, to get back to the parking decks help unlock the value. If I want to open up Tom's Casual Restaurant, well, the more parking I have within a block, the better the chance that I'm going to be successful. And that counts for not only restaurants, it counts for any manner of retailer that you can come across, and even a service, an insurance, storefront business, a dentist, whatever it happens to be, there has to be parking. And today people are very, very concerned about being able to park close to where they're shopping. Notwithstanding that, I remember the IT department at the city, at my request, laid out a 2-scale map of the city, of downtown city center, and overlaid it with a map of Oak Brook Shopping Center. And it turned out that Oak Brook Shopping Center was much bigger than downtown Elmhurst physically. So the walk from Marshall Fields to the back end of Nordstrom's is like 2.5 blocks in downtown Elmhurst scale. But people never think of it that way. They park outside of their first store and then they're in the shopping center. In Elmhurst, people want to park, if they're going to go to 2 places, they want to park in between them.
Well, and the two of you were talking before we started taping about the city's obligation to provide parking.
Yeah, one of the things that's in our comprehensive plan that talks about what the downtown's going to look like is what we call creating a street wall. And that is, so anybody who's going to develop in downtown Elmhurst, they're encouraged by our code to bring their building right up to the sidewalk. It just creates a more inviting avenue and a true downtown feeling. Think about if we didn't have a requirement where they had to, where we encourage them to build their new building right up to the sidewalk. You might have a piano key look, and it really wouldn't be there wouldn't be any sort of continuity. Part of doing that, though, part of telling those developers, hey, here's how we want to build your building, is that we say you're not required to build any parking. That's on us. That's our issue. So when people say, why are you building a parking deck? The fact of the matter is according to our code, that's our job. That is our job. That's our commitment to the developers who come into Elmhurst. Parking, the downtown real estate is so expensive that we can't expect developers to come in, pay for parking, and build a building. It's not the way it's designed. So we've taken that on. You know, folks long before me set that in motion. That's what we're going to do to create our downtown. That's why, you know, as Tom said, they put in some parking decks when he was there, and we're opening up a parking deck this month. So I mean, it's by code and by design.
We're going to take a quick break. We've talked quite a bit about the past. We're going to talk a great deal more about the present and arguably the future when we come back. This is Elmhurst Now. We'll be right back.
Visit elmhurst.org to explore the new City of Elmhurst website. Find out the latest Elmhurst news, pay utility bills and parking tickets, report concerns, and much more. Elmhurst.org is an ideal way to discover what Elmhurst offers your business, your family, your life.
Welcome back to Elmhurst Now. We're talking about Elmhurst downtown with former Mayor Tom Marcucci and current Mayor Steve Morley. And gentlemen, TIF 1, we've talked a little bit about TIF 1 already. TIFs are 23 years initially. TIF 1 was extended. It expires in roughly 5 years. That means that there's still 5 years to use it. How are we using it, I guess, or what do we think these 5 years might bring?
Well, as you mentioned, it's 2021, so it's 5-6 years, and then it's done. You know, TIF law changes almost with every legislative group down in Springfield. When we extended the TIF, there were certain restrictions put on it. Part of it had to do with we released some properties over a certain amount of years, which was good for some of the taxing bodies because part of being a TIF, it freezes some of that. At this point, I believe we've actually released a greater value of buildings and property than the original TIF itself in its entirety that was frozen, so that's a good thing. One of the restrictions, though, when we extended it was that a lot of times in TIFs, if you have a pot of money, you can use that money over here to create this incentive. During this extension, we've got a little bit of a restriction so that if a building's going in, the incentive that we provide has to be paid for out of that specific project. So we have to be mindful of that. But we are working very hard, as we were just discussing. A lot of developers coming into town, knocking on our door. We've got, you know, we felt that one of the things about the new parking deck was if you build it, they will come. And we did a study and it said we were lacking parking. We were full or at capacity at certain times with the current downtown. If there was any development whatsoever, we might be over capacity for an extended period. And we identified with the consultants 8 places that could be developed. And lo and behold, we build the parking deck, it gets approved as we build it. 4 of the 8 are under construction or under contract. So there's some new exciting stuff happening. You know, one of the worst things you can have in a downtown is a surface street level parking lot. It's just, there's no place for it. It's certainly not generating any revenue. And right across the street from the new parking deck, the city had a municipal owned lot. We were able to sell that for quite a bit of cash. And someone's putting up a brand new building there. So
the nature of downtowns, so we talked a little bit about what they were like when the two of you were experiencing them perhaps earlier in your lives. There's a lot of conversation now about a different mix. There was a point in time when retail was necessary and needed to dominate. Now it seems as if downtowns are morphing into more combinations. You need retail certainly, but interspersed service industries, banks, and then entertainment, dining, bars, other leisure activities. Is this the future of downtowns in general? And Elmhurst certainly seems to be trending that way.
I think it is, and I think that it's not only the future of downtowns, it's the today of downtowns. And it's to the credit of the city that we have one of the best functioning downtowns, I think, in suburban Chicagoland, because of all the things that you said. We still have a mix of services. We still have retail. We have some important retail. And then we have a lot of entertainment, the theater, and then dining establishments. And that's what makes downtowns go today. And then on top of that, we have added a significant component of a residential element, which is very, very important. Those folks who live in condominiums in downtown Elmhurst are much more apt when it's, you know, the fella comes home from work, like me and my wife would come home from work, long day at the office. Hey, let's just go, you know, grab something to eat. Well, I'm much more likely to do that if I live in downtown and all I have to do is walk a block to one of our really great dining establishments, then get in a car and drive out to 22nd Street. And I mean, you know, those restaurants are great too, but they're a 15, 20-minute drive from here. So that's a very, very important component. And those folks really help drive downtown. They bring their revenue into the theater, the coffee shops, the barber shops, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
The workout facilities.
The workout facilities, which we're going to have now, you know. And it all works together. And it is really, I think, performing very well.
Steve, does the downtown plan address where Hahn Street, Elmhurst 255, will add 192 luxury apartments of various sizes? So, I mean, that's a pretty healthy new population, even if they're not all new. A number of them will be. Some of the other residential circumstances that Tom mentioned. But does the downtown plan identify what all these new Elmhurstonians are going to want?
Well, that's a good question. It does a little bit. We have a comprehensive plan that really covers all of Elmhurst, and then we have little facets within that comprehensive plan. And one of the things that you learn, especially if you're like Tom and myself, where you've grown up in the town, urban planning and urban development is a long play. It's a long game. It's not something that you decide you want tomorrow. So you better have a plan in place. But the other thing about these plans is that they're very flexible. So even though a plan's completed, I think the downtown plan was maybe originally done, the comprehensive plan in '91, it was redone multiple times to the version that we have right now. And as it relates to actually our downtown plan specific, we are actually in the process now of rewriting a downtown plan that will be an addendum to the current comprehensive plan. It's actually going to zoning and planning within the next meeting or so. So it's a balance between free market and providing the necessary tools for developers who want to come into town. So there's a little bit of vision. We're actually doing a workshop this month in January that brings residents in to talk about what the downtown should look like in the future. And we've hired professionals to help us with that. So you identify as much as you can without being too restrictive. But you want to put yourself in a position to attract those elements that you want in your downtown now and in the future.
Well, I sort of look at Elmhurst 255 as a more robust Crescent Court. And when you consider Crescent Court and what happened after it went in, once again, somewhat controversial and a number of other things, but this is Elmhurst after all. Now it's a thriving restaurant sector with interspersed services and interspersed, retail and a few other things going on. It strikes me across the street from Elmhurst 255, somebody ought to be thinking, and someone is, a whole bunch of someones, I'm sure, gee, what should go in here? What needs to be across the street from a thriving new investment in a very well-established and thriving community?
Well, sorry, Tom. We're hoping that, and that's part of the reason why we're taking another look at the downtown plan, is for those exact reasons. And a lot of what people don't see when a big development goes up like that, whether it's a parking deck or whether it's Hahn Street, there's a regentrification. A lot of properties around those actually change hands during that process, and that's actually happening right now. Yep. And they're just smart developers who are acquiring property as we speak. But then it's all going to come together when, let's say, Hahn Street's done and there's more people there, and there's these developers, actually, smart developers want to partner with the city. Hey, what do you want? What do you think works best? Those plans are in motion as we speak.
The best developer is the guy who comes in and starts the conversation with, I came into City Hall a couple of months ago and I read your comprehensive plan. And in that comprehensive plan, you say you would like this. And this is Joe, my architect, and Joe has rendered this. which we think comports and fits like a glove into your comprehensive plan. Help us make it happen. And as opposed to the guy who comes in and says, hey, I want to build, X, Y, and Z, and that's a big surprise to us because none of us have ever, thought of it, none of our neighbors have ever told us that they want it. But you're absolutely right. The big projects beget the little projects, and things are going to change now in North Downtown. Let's go back to Crescent Court. Early in my time in the mayor's office, I would hear a lot from property owners and retailers south of the tracks. You guys forgot about us. It's all about the York Theater. It's all about north of the tracks. You have the super block up at Schiller and York, but what about us? I haven't heard that in a long time. Downtown, south of the tracks, is thriving. It's vibrant. People, the property owners and the businesses there are doing well, and more importantly, the people of Elmhurst, people in my neighborhood, like to go downtown and enjoy those amenities on the south side of the tracks in a way that they just simply didn't 15 years ago. The same thing is going to happen now north of 3rd Street when the Hahn Street project is up and running, not only because of that new retail there, but that new population base. And by the way, as you mentioned, the new parking deck has already drawn a number of new developments. I was on North Addison Street this morning by coincidence between 2nd and 3rd, and I noticed that the buildings on the east, some of those older buildings on the east side of the street have recently been torn down. Now, I hasten to add, because this is a good point in the conversation, people would say to me, what's the matter with downtown? It seems to be doing well. And I would say, well, look here. And I'd say, look out the window across, there's a single family home on York Road directly across the street from downtown Elmhurst. The building next door to that, which appears to be retail from street level, is in fact a single family home that somebody was allowed to build a commercial structure in the front yard of. That is the kind of, those are remnants from ancient Elmhurst. They were fine in their day, but they are not good fits for a downtown central business district today. And my hope is that, let's say the property owner who owned that single family home that was torn down recently on Addison Street, rather than somebody being, quote, pushed out, my hope is and my belief is that the marketplace finally came to that homeowner and said, you can now leave. We're gonna pay you enough money for your new, higher valued property, new as opposed to 5 years ago, that you're going to be able to move to a more appropriate home for your family, probably a retired person. I shouldn't say that because I don't know that to be true. But my point is that they now have resources to go make a good choice for them and their families.
Well, over $100 million in current development going on in the city right now. Now that's citywide, but much of it downtown. And Steve, I want you to comment on some of the specific things downtown. But in addition to that, there's significant development on Spring Road. A new bakery has come in, and a new retail center is going up as we speak. There's a multi-million-dollar memory facility going down on Brush Hill Road, just west of the hospital complex, and you both touched on the hospital and what that means to the community. So it's not just downtown. I mean, the town is doing very well, and of course, there are now 3 other TIFs, 2 of them well established and doing very well. The 4th one still sort of finding its way in North Elmhurst, which is, of course, arguably the next area of great change. But downtown right now, Steve, just a recap.
Well, downtown, we certainly have the parking deck that's going to be 690 spots. Directly across the street from there, we're hammering out the final details of a fitness facility. Stuff like this that didn't exist 20, 30 years ago. So you had mentioned about keeping the downtown vibrant. There used to be reasons and destinations to go to a downtown, and then with the internet shopping and with larger superstores and stuff, you had to create another reason to make it a destination. So the mix that Tom was talking about, the mix of service and entertainment venues, is what makes the current downtown work. So we've got the parking deck, we've got the fitness center going across the street. In fact, one of the things we kind of touched on, Addison really is undergoing a lot of change. The developers and some of the experts that we hired said, Elmhurst is big enough, Elmhurst is vibrant enough, where you don't just have to have York Road, pardon me, York Road, be your main avenue, your main artery. You actually have enough here where you can make Addison just as productive and just as vibrant. So we have that. You mentioned Hahn Street, which talk about a long play. I think there was 13 or 14 properties that were pulled together over 15 or 16 years. That one just took, and then we got close once, and the market crashed, and the credit dried up. Very happy that that's going in. And the other thing that's between the parking deck, the fitness facility, and Hahn Street alone. You're almost at $100 million in investment in downtown Elmhurst. And part of the thing that's going to create a downtown, and a lot of people who live in a town like Elmhurst want a vibrant downtown. Well, not only do you have to create new ways and stay current with why people want to go downtown, part of it is density. And not only do you increase your tax base with 190 new apartments, but you're adding new lifeblood, and it's fantastic. And we're on the cusp of a lot of changes happening in a good way, which is, I think, part of the reason why we're taking another look at our downtown plan. We want to make sure zoning's in line with people that are coming in, and we want to be as attractive as possible to businesses.
Well, and there are opportunities that are still taking form. The Plas site is still very much taking form. 100 North York, which is at this point a developmental site. And just as you mentioned, houses on Addison, and there are other opportunities on Addison as well. So it's just kind of it's such an interesting time, because on the one hand things are really going well, and then on the other hand it's kind of like it can't get done quick enough. So I'm wondering if either one of you think that the difficulties of the early 90s or late 80s could ever revisit downtown Elmhurst. What
I don't think so. Yeah. I didn't anticipate that question, but my answer is I don't think so. Because it's diversified. The Elmhurst that Mayor Gannett walked into office and found was a virtually, well, that's not true. I was going to say 100% retail. Let's say it was 75% retail and 25% office and services. That 75% really got attacked by the things the mayor's already spoken of. Oak Brook Shopping Center, the internet. The internet, when I was elected mayor, there were 3 bookstores in downtown Elmhurst. And within 5 years, there were none. And that was, remember, Amazon.com started out as a bookseller. Now they're the largest retailer in the world. So they really attacked that portion. So even the businesses that we have here don't have to draw from Oak Park on the east and Naperville on the west. They just have to kind of serve the nice hometown feeling of Elmhurst and folks who want to shop locally, and that's just fine. And they're welcome there, and boy, I think they're just fantastic. Surprisingly, we have some retailers in downtown Elmhurst that are actually doing quite well. They're just doing fabulous, so that's great. But then we have the restaurants, and we have the service area, and we have the theater. So we don't have all our eggs in one basket anymore. And I think that's something that gives us a degree of safety going forward.
Well, the residential density has changed the equation something.
And that's really a baseline. Not only do you have, let's just say it's 190 luxury apartments at the Hahn Street, so let's figure 2.5 people, however many you want, the people they visit, their family, their friends. That really does create some stability. And what's interesting is it's not just today we're talking about downtown development, or not just last week. We've been talking about it in my short term as an elected official for 9 years. Almost every other meeting we're talking about some sort of development. I remember when, and I'm not sure, Tom, if you were still there, we were talking about what we wanted at Hahn Street. I think it was the first time around, what we wanted. And one of the experts came in, and I remember distinctly saying, well, what do you want? And some people said, oh, I want a luxury hotel, I want this, I want that. I said, I don't know what it's called, but I want York Theater 2.0. Hundreds and hundreds of thousands of visitors coming to your downtown. That's what you want. I didn't know what it was at the time. What's interesting is, if all goes well, we think that the fitness center that's going in across from the parking lot or the parking deck is going to create almost the equivalent amount of visits, unique visits in a year to downtown Elmhurst. And that is just going to be a boon for all of the retailers and service folks that are down there. And it's just, like Tom said, it's a part of diversification.
We mentioned a few minutes ago the other three TIFs. TIF 2, of course, Lake Street, the still new Superior Ambulance Building, and the hotel, and the revived car dealerships on that street. TIF 3, which is Elmhurst Crossing, the Kohl's, the Whole Foods now, the Portillo's, and even across the street. TIFs 2 and 3 are doing very well. TIF 2, though, is coming to its end very shortly, and it ends before TIF 1 does, actually. Plans for, not necessarily specific plans for the TIFs, but I know TIF 3 near and dear to your heart, Tom.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I think that the TIF has a life, and there's a purpose to that. The whole idea of TIF is to allow the city to get involved and support development by making investments with the concept, the idea that those investments will be repaid by the increased taxes on the property. Now here's the end game though, is that then the TIF expires and those increased properties are returned to the total tax base to the benefit of the other taxing bodies. And quite frankly, that boils down to the school district, I mean principally, and the park district too. But so that's a natural thing. I don't think we need to panic because the TIFs are ending. TIF 2, as you called it, the Lake and Walnut TIF, the major stuff that we laid out has all been, is it done? Is it perfect? Absolutely not. But it accomplished most, if not all, of its principal goals. The car dealerships, I think they would be gone completely if that TIF wasn't there. The new Toyota dealership is completely dependent on that TIF having been put in place so that the city could get aggressive about assembling the property. There were, on the south side of Lake Street, west of Walnut, there was something, and I'll give you the gist of it, I don't remember the exact number, but something like 8 different property owners and 14, 15, or 16 different PIN numbers, different lots. And nobody wanted to sell to anybody because nobody wanted to be the first guy out. They thought the last guy is going to, quote, make all the money. Well, the city came in, both north and south of Lake Street, and said, we'll be the buyer, and we'll give everybody a fair price. How's that sound? And they all said, great. Then when we had all the property, we could reconfigure it into a way that was marketable as opposed to the hodgepodge of properties that were there. When I was elected mayor, Lake Street and Walnut, that southwest corner, was a out-of-business gas station that had been out of business for years. And that was like in a prairie. There were weeds growing up all around it. Today you have a bank, a hotel, and an anchor car dealer, which I think has kept the other car dealers along Lake Street. So it's worked out really pretty well.
The other economic incentives that are available to the city other than TIF, I know pure incentives are available.
Well, certainly you can always write a check, right? The developers are always happy to do that, but that's not something that we typically like to do. We like to see some sort of co-investment. A lot of times what we'll do is a sales tax rebate. So if we've got a car dealer that maybe wants to expand and bring a new nameplate in, and they're saying, well, I'm going to spend $3 million to create a new building and bring this new nameplate in, we might participate in that where there's a tax that the city gains for every new car sold. Well, if we can work with the car dealer and calculate the incremental sales, but for this new business, did they sell 400 new cars? And we have a couple of those in place already where we will rebate them 50% of the sales tax that they would give in the city. And these car dealers, and that's the other thing when it comes to any of these incentives, whether it's a sales tax incentive or a TIF incentive, this is the playing field. This is right. It's not, some people will say to me, boy, why don't they just come to Elmhurst because Elmhurst is great? And I'll agree with them that Elmhurst is great. But there's a finite number of development dollars out there. And we are in competition every day with Downers Grove, Glen Ellen, Naperville, you name it. Rarely does a developer ever come knock on my door and say, I have this great idea, without saying, and I'm thinking about doing it at 2 other places. And it's not a game. It's not a bluff. They are, you know, some of these margins are so thin, they want to be successful, and we want them to be successful. But it's, you know, you have to pay attention to their needs, and they're going to do what's right. Ultimately, they're the ones who are spending the most dollars. So these incentives are great. They are a necessary part of development. Without it, we'd have a lot of people knocking on our doors, and we'd show them how great Elmhurst is, but I think we'd lose a lot of these developers. So it's tough. We're out there competing with everybody every day.
These are incentives. I mean, you have to focus on that word, an incentive, to make a decision. It needs to tip the scales in favor of Elmhurst as opposed to some other location. But we cannot, and we've had people come in and they say, well, you know, I want this big amount of money and I'm going to build this building and we're going to employ 75 people. They're asking us to capitalize their business. Well, we're not stockholders. We're not investing in businesses. We don't do that. And we shouldn't do that. But on the other hand, if we can just incent you to focus on Elmhurst as opposed to someplace else with a little bit of extra. I once had a guy come in our office and basically he said, I have a business in the city of Chicago. I generate $100 million a year in top line revenue. That's all sales taxable. I'm going to, and he had a number, he said, over the next decade, I'm going to generate $20 million for some community. And I'm going to locate my business in the first community that gives me half of it back. It's as simple as that. He wasn't interested in the building, the driveway, the access. He was just interested in the money. So guess what? We did it. And I was criticized, you know, oh, gee, you know. But for me, it was like, oh, found money. It took 2 meetings to get it done. And he did come to Elmhurst. He did work the building. He did employ 75 people. And he did basically $60 to $80 million a year, and still does, by the way. And one of the things that the mayor didn't mention, but I'll remind you, you know this, they have a life. So the incentive, the sales tax incentive to a car dealer might only be for the first 10 years. We used to put a limit on it. And think of a graph, you know, it goes up a little bit every year. There were 2 limits on it. Maximum amount of money, let's say we'll give you a sales tax incentive for $5 million is the maximum you can get over the next 10 years. And if you get to either one of those lines first, it's over. So if you get to 10 years and you've only collected $4 million, well, you collected $4 million. If you collect $5 million in 3 years, it's done. So that was the incentive.
Last question, 30 seconds each. You know, magic wand time for 16-year mayor, current mayor, magic wand time. You get to wave the, what would you do with the magic wand right now in Elmhurst?
I think I wouldn't change course. I think that the city has been and continues to be on the right direction. I think downtown is critically important to our future for a variety of ways. One thing we didn't touch on is the metro station. You asked what were the dangers? If the metro station went away, it would change the character of downtown completely. I had a conversation this morning with someone who's very interested in urban design for the Chicago metropolitan area. And Elmhurst only gets about a C rating on transit-oriented design. Other communities, Arlington Heights being an example, have put a lot more residential into downtown Arlington Heights, which then uses the train to get downtown. It's good for the people that live there, low cost of transportation, easy access to downtown jobs. It's very good for the host community.
Steve?
Magic wand, I would like the new TIF 4, and the North York plan to be as successful as the downtown business district. I think that would be fantastic. I also think that there's certain things we can do. We have a couple of industrial parks in Elmhurst that I think are underutilized. I think with the right incentives and maybe some zoning changes that are a little archaic, we could bring in some of those large businesses that Tom's talking about and really have a great impact on Elmhurst in the future.
Gentlemen, thank you for your leadership and your service and joining me tonight on Elmhurst Now. Been very enjoyable. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Ken.
We've been talking with Mayor Steve Morley and former Mayor Tom Marcucci about downtown and just all things Elmhurst. I'm Ken Bartels for Elmhurst Now. Good night.
I'm John Quigley, President and CEO of the Elmhurst Chamber of Commerce and Industry. In these challenging economic times, it's imperative that our residents and businesses band together to not only shop Elmhurst, but buy Elmhurst whenever possible. We have great stores in our city center, Spring Road, Butterfield Road, York and Villette Streets, St. Charles and Route 83, North Avenue and Lake Street, along North York and even Grand Avenue. I ask for your help. Let's keep our tax dollars in Elmhurst.